It is because of these three things that they are gang stalking me. Number one, I am probably the most outspoken critic against psychiatry, as far as having a whole lot of videos criticizing psychiatry effectively with thousands of valid sources. Two, I made a challenge for $4,000, about the same amount of money as the No Knockout KO Master did. I challenged MMA fighters the same way he did, except for they cannot beat me at my challenge. So, and I'm the truth. There's no fakeness in my style. I make demonstrations, 15 hits in 1.2 to 1.4 seconds with sparring gloves on and sparring helmet. Over 100 victories, no losses, etc. And the last is that the system is extremely racist. If it wasn't, it would not tolerate this. They would have done a serious investigation a long time ago for many reasons. One of which is the hate crime on the wall. Okay, so gang stalking being real highlights the fact that psychiatry is a fraud, and I cannot emphasize that enough. And it is about power, reputation, and money first. We know that psychiatry is a joke because there are no adjustments of criteria for defining schizophrenia and mental illness after MKUltra. They do not consider the deeper implications of MKUltra or the fact that it even existed and what it means for psychiatric diagnosis. There are no valid diagnostic tests and no real investigation, period. Not into your brain, not into the circumstances of your life. Unless, of course, they're running a psyop on you and trying to play you out. It's crazy. Funny how that works. So when we look at the iron triangle of sociology and economics, it proves definitively the relationship between the lobby groups, the corporations, and the politicians. One can draw a pyramid with the corporations on top, then the government, then the intelligence agencies, and mental health and law enforcement. And on the bottom, all the foot soldiers that have been historically used by organized crime and corporations, which include prison gangs and street gangs and drug addicts and other foot soldiers that the people who are doing this ironically refer to as lowlives, but I refer to as God's children. So how do they make this system more thoroughly integrated, as Rockefeller in his memoirs, I believe it was, said that they were trying to do? Well, they use secret societies, clubs, corporate partnerships, special interest groups, lobby groups. They use these different groups to bring people together. Then they talk about, hey, what do you do for a living? And they further cement and integrate from there. So when you look at terms that have become common in sociology, like white denial, you rarely see them include psychiatric denial. What they're doing is making compromises, and those compromises are very detrimental. They are harming us more than I can possibly express, because psychology creates white denial. It is psychology. It is propaganda. It is a massive propaganda campaign, and the disproportionately white and Jewish corporations that push it. And the deal between the Jews and the whites, the rich ones that is, I'm not racist, is that we will both pick on the blacks and pretend to be on their side. We'll have fake white Christians pretending that we're going to help them with their perspectives on Christianity and God. And we're going to have fake leftists, hippies, vegans, communists, etc., pretending to stick up for these people. But everything they're doing is to cement the governing class's control over people. And of course, when you look at communism, it leads to a central bank giving bankers more power. Capitalism is just a bunch of rich people playing mind games on everyone, maintaining the power and making sure the power is top heavy instead of with the people. So these are some symptoms that I've experienced. And what's interesting is, whether I am on psych meds or they are covertly drugging me and I notice the funny taste, or immediately I feel drugged, from drinking a beverage, the symptoms are very similar. The only symptom that really is different than the psych meds is the knocking out. They've drugged me where immediately, within like 5 minutes, I need to sleep and I'm going for the bed, Anyway, so cognitive impairment, loss of coordination, stiff muscles, legs cramps, they even fall asleep, especially in the car, if I'm in the car for more than like 30 minutes, clumsiness, drowsiness, feeling like a drugged up zombie, difficulty communicating, being less functional. It reminds me of the Code of Silence documentary when that CO, corrections officer, said that he sounds like a babbling idiot on psych meds, and he doesn't want to sound like that. Headaches, hopelessness, feelings of hopelessness. It's impossible to do physical activity, loss of ambition, knocking out, and loss of sex drive. I've experienced a dramatic loss of sex drive. And yeah, so I was on Depakote and Abilify last. That's the meds they currently have me prescribed on. And yes, it is destroying what's left of my life. Psych meds, as a free thinker, takes you from having a very hard life to having a hopeless one. I go as far as to say that as uncontrolled opposition, when you are targeted as a political activist, there isn't much hope for you. If you're targeted for just being a public nuisance or something, you might be able to bounce back. But politics makes people very vengeful and vindictive and very petty. So for me, there is no coming back. I'm pouring my heart out into these videos. And some of them I make them a lot more passionate than others, so you cannot tell really. And that's not intentional. Anyway, I've experienced all sorts of things, from harassment to hacking, prank calls. Today, on the way to Morgan Hill, I passed about 10 cars, and 5 of them had one headlight. One of them looked like a northern Hispanic gang member. So, some of them were like these kind of small town truck drivers with their company logo on their driver's side door, and things of this nature. Everyday folks who seem like the type of people that might belong to Freemasonry or something. Some of them construction workers and architects, especially, makes me think, but I don't know what their connection is. But certainly they're in some kind of a club or group that attaches to this. And they've drugged me, and when I drink alcohol or weed, or smoke weed, I can tell that I'm being drugged. And this isn't the first time. This happens all the time in America. For the foreign audiences and for the ignorant American audiences who don't know that this happens all the time, you might want to look up roofies and Mickeys and how that they're coming up with all kinds of devices to reduce date rape, because it is so common in our society. So if you don't know that MK Ultra and looking for a knockout pill and the rise of roofies in college culture is connected, you're an idiot. I bet you don't think the LSD and MK Ultra and mind control programs and the rise of the LSD hippie culture are connected. On record, these drug cultures come from the intelligence community who decide who, what, when, where, how, why. Who to give the drugs to, what group of people, and how much to charge them. They decide all these things, and they consider the effects on society at large. Of course, not considering our feelings or our well-being. They're considering their pockets. I've had white people in my family explain to me that, not in terms of gang stalking, but in terms of being white in general, that it's like there's a bunch of rich white people who kind of throw less rich white people bones for helping them maintain the power structure. And they were trying to sell it to me as if it wasn't such a bad thing. So anyway, we see these drugs being used for many reasons, not just recreation, obviously. Drugs to throw people off balance. I mean, this is before recreational abuse. These drugs were intended for a purpose by the military-industrial complex, the corporations, the Scottish Rite, etc. On record. The purpose for meth in World War II given to the Nazi troops was to make them more effective. Okay? So drugs have been used to throw people off balance. agents were supposed to use these drugs on an ad hoc basis, according to the MKUltra and the Supreme Court's findings and the Ford Commission, Rockefeller, etc. And ad hoc means for this, or for this purpose, okay? Drugs to enhance performance. We see that these people not only came up with the idea to make physical activity impossible with the MKUltra substances, but they give their athletes drugs to make themselves, their school, their country, etc. look good. And over the years, this has become kind of a culture in many gyms and so on, in many colleges, to where 2 out of 3 athletes in some cases have reported, have admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs at some point. College athletes. I did a video about that. So drugs to sabotage and make a group or individual more dependent. So when the CIA brought cocaine into the black communities, what do you think they were thinking? Just, we're going to make a lot of money, or we're going to make it harder for these people to think? They're going to be more dependent on the government and more docile. Instead of being desperate to help their people out, they're desperate to get their next fix. It turned the Panthers into street gangs, you know, so to speak, more or less. Okay, these people had an agenda. They didn't just say, hey, let's go make some money off these black guys. They said, we're going to hold down this demographic to further white supremacy. Again, I'm not racist. And I can't let these people prey on innocent people regardless of their race. I'm a man of honor, and it is my sacred duty as a real Christian to do what I can to help the least of my brethren, and I am going to do that, even though it's going to cost me even more than I see it already, you know, than I see it costing me already. All right. So let's look at psychology real quick. Let's wrap this up. Well, psychology has been studying dependencies, not just drugs, but, you know, women being dependent on their husbands for domestic violence. They study serial killers and that effect, I forgot what it's called, that effect when the victim starts sympathizing with the perpetrator of a crime, you know, someone holding them hostage or something. Okay, they study these different phenomenons and effects, and they decide what to do with that information. And of course, the military is always looking for military applications. The corporations are always looking for corporate applications. And the racists are always looking at what's going on and trying to make it seem like it proves that blacks are inferior. This is also why I am highly suspicious of the recent report about the race of the ancient Egyptians, especially the way the article is written. It seems to me like a bunch of racists did a racist bias study so that a bunch of racists in the news can pretend that black people are just rambling idiots, you know. And I still hold that the ancient Egyptians are black, and they haven't definitively proven anything, and they write the articles as if they have. It's disgraceful. Anyway, they study mantras and sayings to help yourself, things that you can tell yourself, you know, for self-help books, right? Articles on bullying, workplace bullying, cyberbullying, etc. They study criminality, you know, the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI. So when you look at everything that's going on, you would have to be a fucking moron not to come to the conclusion that there are corrupt cops working with petty-ass psychologists and shrinks, you know, in the department, who they use to help them solve crimes, which we all know is a joke, right? They're useless sluts that they sleep with, and they don't really help them solve anything. But anyway, but they do help them figure out how to push people's buttons, because after studying human behavior for, you know, all these decades, psychologists would have to be completely insane to pretend they understand human behavior, because they gathered more than enough evidence to know exactly how, you know, how ridiculous it would be to claim that. But they've also studied enough to know what makes people tick to a certain extent, what are their pet peeves, and how to figure out people's buttons and how to push them effectively. So when you look at this thing, organized harassment it's part of the American way. And so America needs to really change. They need to stop trying to reinvent themselves in the image of Hades, and they need to turn to God and their true nature. Thank you.